Hi, everybody. It's Shelley Kramer. Welcome to this week's edition of V3 Live, the Internet of Things. And I couldn't be any more thrilled to have my guest today. Her name is Wendy Scherer. She's the founder and the managing partner of a company called the Social Studies Group. I met Wendy, oh my gosh, like 4 or 5 years ago. We were both speakers at a conference, and she was the closing keynote, and I fell in mad girl crush love with her from that moment on, and she truly is the smartest person I know. And Wendy's expertise is all about, involves social media research and gathering, taking complex information and breaking it down so even dummies like me can understand it. And I have there's not a project that I work on that I don't think about how can I get Wendy involved in this, because it will make everything I do better, every result I produce better. And she doesn't pay me to say this, by the way. And I've referred her to so many people over the years I can't even count, and I still keep getting emails from those people saying, oh my God, she's the best thing ever. Thank you so much. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you my dear friend Wendy Scherer. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and blushing a little.
We're so glad to have you today. So we're going to talk about, I know that you experience this all the time, and I know that many marketers like me who are out in the trenches experience this. And what happens is that, you know, companies, sometimes very large companies, sometimes very small companies, some agencies, you know, are trying to do things, and they have an idea about what they want to do, but they're not really thinking about research and insight gathering and doing homework before launching a campaign. Sometimes from an agency standpoint, sometimes it's client driven in that an agency might know that this is an important component, but the client doesn't want to budget for this or whatever. So what I want you to talk about a little bit today to kick this off is just why monitor? What's the benefit beyond just the obvious, you know, reputation management? You know, give us the broad view of why we need to be doing this.
Well, there's a couple of really important reasons to be monitoring and listening. You need to understand the space where you live. So if you're thinking about a new project or thinking about an initiative, understanding what's happening around it, what your consumers are doing besides what you're talking about, and the atmosphere surrounding what you're doing is really, really important. And that information is a little bit harder to find. So there's that sort of thing, but you also want to be able to support a campaign, see if something's already been done, understand attitudes, and know competitive work out there. So you want to understand customer service around your competitors, but you also want to understand what's happening within your own space. So there's a lot of really important things to learn.
Well, and I think, too, from my standpoint in thinking about a couple of the things that we've worked on together, sometimes the path you think you're going down isn't the best path to use, right? And so you can do some of this up front and kind of integrate what your findings into your strategies and end up delivering a lot more benefits than you might otherwise. And I think that's really what all of us are in the business of doing, you know, whether we work on the agency side, whether we work on the brand side, is delivering some benefits. So what I want to talk about now is let's talk a little bit about strategy. So take us a little bit deeper into, you know, some of the kind of things that we should, as marketers, think about monitoring.
Well, we want to monitor our competition, and by competition I don't just mean the people who are directly competing with what your product or brand is doing, but what occupies the same spaces that would take away from it. So specifically like in entertainment, if you are looking at some sort of a travel space, that could compete with camps and other things in your area. So you want to look really broadly to see what your customers might be thinking about instead of what you're doing. So broadly look at your space and then drill down and look for similarities.
Well, you're talking about a share of mind competition.
Absolutely, and you can do that. There are some ways to look at very broad listening programs that won't cost a lot of money, where you can really look at a big broad world and make some comparisons and understand some things that you wouldn't be able to understand without that. Other things that you want to look at, though, are points of view and drill down within the consumers and see what people are thinking about and attitudes, which will really help influence your direction and strategies.
Okay. Do you have some examples of that? I know that we've got some examples today to talk about. I don't know if we're there yet, so you need to maybe tell me.
Why don't we jump in? Because I think that that will help. I think that also one of the things that I want to talk about, and when I start to show you some tools that will help you do this, is that your imagination and any question that you think you might want to know, you can figure out how to find that kind of information and not to let all the articles that you see about how to do research and how to do a competitive review and an audit, don't let that steer you. Let the way you think steer you, because you can find what you want. And if you want to back it up with traditional research later, it'll give you clues to save you money and time then also.
So that's really why you're here today, by the way. You're here today to help us learn to think differently. So I think that's really, to me, the magic that you bring to the equation in anything that I'm working on, is that you always help me and our clients think differently. So let's go.
Okay, terrific. Let's pull up slide A. I want to talk first about analysis tools and being able to look at big pictures in an industry. So slide A is going to show you Mention, which is a free tool. You can pay a little bit for it if you want more space, or you can get your friends to sign up for it and get more space. And you can look at competitive mentions in social media. And will I see it when it goes up? Yes. Sorry, I didn't see that it was there. And so what I did here, just as a quick show, is to take 3 sunscreen brands, plug them in pretty broadly without doing a lot of refinement, and you can see very, very clearly that Banana Boat is much, much higher than the other brands. But then you have to think about logic here. Does it make sense if we know that Coppertone is the #1 brand, the Banana Boat gets so much more in social media? So there's the logic piece. It doesn't make sense. What's in there also, and this is what I normally spend a half an hour in a presentation talking about, is thinking about logic. It doesn't make sense. The Banana Boat's so big, so you dive into some of that and you notice they're talking about vacations and about parasailing and all kinds of other things. So you need to make your searches really good. And so my public service announcement for the moment is read the fine print, learn advanced search, and learn Boolean searching if you want to have results that are useful. Because if you went out and made a strategy based on this, if you were Coppertone and thought, oh my gosh, Banana Boat is killing us out there, you wouldn't look real together. Moving on to D, there's another really nice tool that used to be a lot more in the forefront that I really love, Ice Rocket, and it also looks at trends. And through Ice Rocket, you can get a really quick read. And what I think is interesting here is that you see the exact same problem with Banana Boat, but you're able to see how this trends over time very, very well, and be able to look at the seasonality and start thinking about that when you're starting to build strategies. When are people talking? It looks like spring break to me. Very interesting to be able to start looking at your industry in a time frame. And then moving on to E, there's another really good trending tool that you can drill down into, Topsy, and it looks at more blogs than some of the other ones do. Though skipping back real quickly to Mention is a really great engagement tool, so definitely check that out. On Topsy, you can see that it's fairly similar, but that you can drill into it in a slightly different way. And this one I looked at oranges and apples and berries and strawberries, and so I just really wanted to be able to look at where those different trends lie and how you can see it visually and to be able to drill into those pieces. The first thing that I always do, and Shelley, you and I talk about this all the time, is go wide. You want to go really, really wide and then start learning about the things that make you curious. What content is important to you? What are you trying to say? When you want to learn an industry, what matters? So if we want to go back to B, and I know I'm going out of order, there's a wonderful tool some of you might know called BuzzSumo. And in BuzzSumo, one of the neatest things is that you can type in a subject, and it's going to show you the top articles that have been shared about that subject, including how many Facebook shares, Twitters, and everything else. So then you can see in that, of course, making sure your search is good first, because you just learned that on the last slides. But once your search is good, now you can drill down and say, here's the articles that people really, truly care about. So what do I care about? Do I care about these things? Well, perhaps these are important to me too, but I know for sure this is what people are actually reading. So that's a great jumping off point when you start thinking about what's going to be interesting in your space. Looking at
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah,
We use Mention.
You do use Mention?
We love it.
Yeah, mention's really, really good. I
Uh-huh.
use it a lot. And I have, just as a stepping back, I use a lot of really expensive paid tools. These tools I'm showing you are all free. I use paid tools because there are paid tools that can do stuff that none of this stuff can do, that really think like a researcher, are really amazing. I'm a huge Brandwatch fan. Um,
Right.
but not everybody is going to go get that kind of a budget, and you don't always need to. Maybe you need to once you get farther down the road and you've got a big initiative happening. But when you're thinking, should be able to think for free.
Right.
There's a lot of information out there. Looking at F, Hootsuite. So I don't know if you use Hootsuite, but we do. And one of the things that it's really good for that I don't think most people do is search. So you can put a search term, create a column, but did you know that you can search within your search term column? So what I'm showing on F, and it's kind of little, so I don't know how well you can all see that, is I did a search for fresh fruit. So here's all the mentions coming in on Twitter about fresh fruit, and then I can search within that and see how many of them are talking about peaches.
Very cool.
So that's really nice. So I can go back and I can say, okay, so these are all about fruit, but are people talking more about berries or more about peaches or more about apples? And I can do that quick on the fly, instantaneous, and start getting ideas for what I want to do next and where I want to think. Obviously, it's a very simplistic example to be looking at fresh fruit, but there are a lot of things when you're looking at big data and some really complex terms, and you can make those initial searches fairly complicated. You can get pretty darn precise in getting the trends.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I really, really love that idea for ideation. Another thing that's kind of interesting is on G, just looking at one of the examples that came up through the previous monitoring when I was looking for the sunscreen is this weather report. Well, if I was writing and thinking of ideas and I'm trying to market for a sunscreen, isn't it interesting that people are using hashtag Coppertone when they're posting the weather on their vacation or wherever they are? That's kind of a nice way to start looking at for our bigger picture promotional ideas, is to see what consumers are doing that you might not have thought of, because obviously there's interest.
Right.
Another thing that social media monitoring can be really good at doing is identifying influencers. Now, I want to step back and say I hate the term influencers. I don't think that we're looking for influencers online. What we're looking for is people that we want to be interested in. We want to read what they have to say. We think it's important. We want to learn. We want to build relationships. Looking for people and targeting them as influencers, to me, kind of shallows that a bit, and it's much more of a human thing to me. But you've got to find out who you care about reading and what you want to learn in a particular industry. One really interesting way is looking at H. There's a site called Follower Wonk that you can search the descriptions of a Twitter handle. So how people describe themselves. So if you're looking for someone who does social media research and you type that in, you're going to find me, or you're going to find other people who do what I do, because that's how we describe ourselves on Twitter. So being able to search those Twitter profiles is kind of a neat thing, and there aren't a lot of tools to do that. So that's one way that I really like that. BuzzSumo, looking at I, is another one where they have an influencer search straight on there. So if you type in any topic, it's going to show you people who fit in to those who write about that topic. It's not perfect, but it's not a bad start. I found some pretty interesting people in some pretty esoteric industries that way. It's just a really, really good starting point, and I love it. And then on J, you can find people the same kind of way on Topsy, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is also a really nice way to do it. But thinking even one step further, when you start identifying people, what do you want to know about them? How can you learn more about them? And there are things you can do, for instance, on BuzzSumo, where you can search a specific person's content. For instance, what they write on LinkedIn. There's a way to isolate just Shelley on just LinkedIn so that I can see what she's posting there, and then I can search within it to find out what words she's using to see what those keys are. And I had an example, and I think it was too little, so I didn't show it. Wait a minute. There it is. I skipped around. It's H, but it's really small. Is it H? At any rate, I'm just going to tell you what it is. So I searched to see how often Shelley used the word you, Y-O-U, rather than the word I, in her context, and it's a whole lot more. And so I think it's a really interesting way to look at people and compare them against each other by looking at the types of content they put out, whether it's inward focused or outward focused, as you're learning about people and deciding who it is that you want to study and understand as you're looking for content ideas and industry ideas.
By the way, that's a conscious effort on my part, and I'm so glad to see that because from to me, a first rule of writing content should not be I think this and I'm so important and I, sort of shoving your thoughts down somebody else's throats. It's really about here's what we think and what do you think, and so I'd love to see. I passed the test and I didn't even know I was being tested. Yay!
Awesome. I can tell you that as I do that experiment on a lot of people, and I do because I think it's particularly interesting when a client asks me to identify important people for them to read,
Right.
And I prefer the people who are thinking about the world. Many of the people that I admire do that on a regular basis. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. That's great. A great influencer strategy.
Yeah, so it's really fun to watch. Another thing that I think can be very, very helpful and something we all have trouble doing at a low price point is visualizations. A lot of people think much more visually. If we look at K, there's a really awesome site. There's some limitations to it, but it's called Many Eyes. You can't do it on Chrome, which is annoying, but it's really nice and you need Java, blah, blah. Anyway, you can put any text in and visualize it in a variety of different ways. The example that I'm showing you here is I was looking at Latism, and it brought out the people that the Latism movement were talking about and some of the people that were particularly being focused on, and it was really very interesting. So before I went and spoke at that conference, I was able to look and see who was being discussed within that community so that I could gear my presentation to make sense within a community that I didn't know very well. So that was really fun.
You mean you could actually prepare in advance and deliver content that's relevant?
Crazy.
What a novel concept. Think about how that relates to a new business pitch or a competitive analysis. We work together a lot and with clients and with agencies and with brands, and part of what we start with is a brief competitive analysis. So think about how that could help anybody with regard to doing that work.
Absolutely. And there's other visualization tools that are really nice. I mean, everybody knows Wordle, and there's a bunch like that make word clouds. There's challenges with word clouds. Sometimes it doesn't really give you as much as you want. That's another reason I use a lot of paid tools, is because you can drill deeply within the word clouds and see what content lies within it to really understand what those big words sometimes mean on the pictures. But it's a great starting point and something that I strongly, strongly recommend.
Very cool.
Yeah. So really, the one other thing that I didn't tell you that I wrote on my notes to absolutely tell you is that you can get the data to input into something like Many Eyes from BuzzSumo, which is really a lovely search engine. And so you can hit the download button, take the results of your search, and then input them into Many Eyes so that you can see what they look like. And a lot of times what you'll get is the headlines or the main stories that people are talking about, so you can get a very quick picture of hundreds or even thousands of results very, very quickly to understand it. The time it would take to read 1,000 entries would certainly take a lot longer.
Very cool. You know what I thought would be helpful, and I'm totally kind of just throwing this at you, unplanned, which is what I love about you, but what would be, we can talk about monitoring and insights, we can talk about tools, we can talk about you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, but the reality of it is I think that once we walk away from this conversation, we may or may not make time, you're crazy if you don't, make time to check out some of these tools, but then learning them, figuring them out is always kind of tricky. One thing I want people to know for sure is that you are a consultant, and again, to everybody listening, my job here, Wendy didn't hire me to sell her services, but what I do sometimes with Wendy is say, okay, here's what I need. How much is it going to cost me to have you set it all up for me and hand it over and take me through it? And that $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 that you spend up front can have somebody that knows what they're doing figure this stuff out, hand it over to you, and let you drive it. And I'm not quoting a fee for Wendy on this, but think about that too as you put your campaigns together, because I know that I don't have the patience sometimes to put all this stuff together, and I don't have the time to do it. That was an aside, though. What I wanted to talk about is Wendy and I were talking recently about, we were working on a pitch pitch for a client. We were talking with them about the difference between what they thought they wanted us to do for them and what that would cost, and what we thought they needed to do, and why those two things are different. And I think that that happens to us a lot. And so I think maybe if we use that as an example, and talk about that, and kind of some of the things that we propose and why we propose that, do you think that real world example might help?
Possibly. I'm not sure I know exactly what road you're going down, but yes, I do think that it's a lot of times the client will say that they're looking to push content out of a specific type, and they think that that's what's of interest to their audience. Is this where you were going?
Well, yes and no. We were challenged by a client that needed a media client that wanted, that didn't have a stronghold in the social media space. And so they were thinking, well, if we can just hire you to help us develop communities, in this one vertical or this one horizontal, then, and you can kind of, I'm dancing around this because it's kind of difficult to explain, so maybe I shouldn't have used this. But what they thought they wanted us to do was just go build follower bases. And what we said is, I'm not sure that the measurement of more followers is really what you're looking for. Instead, what we need to do is we need to back into this differently. Instead of jumping into social media channels, we need to back into this differently, and here's what we suggest we do instead. And so that's what I'm thinking about, and if you happen to have top of mind some of the things that we suggested to them. And the first part of it was some comprehensive listening and insight gathering.
Yes. Okay, so I know where we're going now. So it is important to step out and see. A lot of times clients think that what their consumers are looking for is a very specific track of information. And oftentimes, and this is really going back to looking really broadly, often it's really a useful exercise to look at who the influencers are within, there I use that word, within an industry, and look at what they're saying that is actually being well received by the same audience that your client is looking to speak to, and to understand what those real life conversations are, where the real pain points are. And it's not difficult to do those things. You can do broad social media searching, or you can limit your searches by certain sets of people and following certain conversations surrounding a very specific subject and understanding that. And it can help you with very, very much more specific content strategies. Looking at what I showed you a bit earlier with BuzzSumo, that's a very simple way to do that as well, to be able to look at a broad category and then drill down and see what's within it. So I really do think that's what we were talking about, is trying to understand how to see what is really being discussed, what is really important, and that sometimes a client sees a much broader picture or thinks people are interested in their specific product or services for reasons that they're really not.
Right.
So looking at the reality.
Well, and what we said to this particular client was that what you are doing and what your competitors in this space are doing is pushing out content that you think people care about, and what's happening is that they're not interested, and we look at, and we can tell they're not interested based on what's happening in social, based on what's happening with your website traffic. You have an 80% bounce rate, so whatever it is you're giving them isn't enough to entice them to stay around. Mm-hmm. So we have to redefine what reach really is. If you have a huge reach, but that results in traffic that bounces or no conversions or anything else, then that reach isn't doing you any good. So what we said is, what we can help you do is by going down this path of research first, insight gathering first, and then content ideation, content for the blog content or article content that's written, content to be shared in the social media space, visual content, other rich media content. So it's really a matter of not putting the cart before the horse. So instead of doing what it is you think people want, we can tell you what people want if you let us do the homework first.
Absolutely. And speaking to the visual versus print versus what type of content people want, thinking about tools and a way to do that in a very simple way is looking at mention, and I'm sure you use it this way also. The analytics piece of mention will do exactly that. So if you go with a broad search, you can look and see what's actually mattering in different platforms versus, blogs versus Facebook versus Twitter versus Instagram. And you can see where the action really is, and then you can drill down within where those big pockets are and see what people really care about versus what you think they care about.
And I think, to me, that's just the biggest message for anybody, for a huge company, a small company, for a brand, for an agency. You have to quit thinking about what it is you think, and it's right there. They'll tell you. They'll tell you what they think, what they care about, what resonates with them, what doesn't. You just have to care enough to listen, and you have to be smart enough to use some of these kind of tools and tactics, especially if you can't afford something like BrandWatch, some of the more expensive tools. And there's some great tools out there. And you know what? I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't budget for those kind of things, because the better your information is, the better your results are going to be. That's a given. And anything else that happens is luck. So absolutely, I believe you should budget for, especially today. Data has never been more important. Data is never going to be any more important. I was preparing for a presentation that I gave to the AAF this last week, and I came across a quote from Google's director. One of the things he said was that there's never been a time that we have had more access to the collective consciousness of people. It's right there. Billions of conversations are taking place, and it's right there for the taking. You just have to care enough to pay attention. And you have to be smart enough to use tools, paid or not, that will help you do that.
Right.
So, have we already talked about what to do with the data we bring in? I know we touched on it a little bit, but I don't want to leave people hanging.
Yeah, I think that all the data in the world and bad input doesn't do anything for you. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to think like a strategist and understand what it is. Make sure you're bringing in clean information, and then think about it and parse it out in as specifically as you can so that it can be meaningful. Just big piles of data aren't important. So you want to think like a strategist, ask lots of questions, and really use this information in the different conversations that you're having. Think about it when you're thinking about what your marketing is, but think about it in product development, and think about it in the customer service cycle, and use it. Use your imagination. Think like a consumer, but also think like a strategist, and really try to understand what to do with it, and then dig some more. It's just a process.
You gave an example once in recent years when I saw you, Wendy and I sometimes speak at the same conferences, and you gave an example once about something that you identified as a result of some research you were doing for a client that was totally outside the realm. I'm thinking related to bento boxes, but I know it's happened more than once. Can you share with us one of those stories?
The bento boxes was a great one, actually. We were doing a ton of research about snacks and lunches, and we started to see trends for bento boxes long before we started to actually see them, which we've all seen now. And we took it forth to the client, and they used it as an idea, and they were at the very beginning of the curve, which was awesome. And we also did a project once where we were working with a fabric maker who sells their fabrics for outdoor clothing and such. And we learned that the community was dying for a specific piece of apparel that hadn't been developed yet, a feature in a piece of apparel. And we took it back to them, and they talked about developing it because it was something consumers were dying for that nobody was making. And we came across it by being curious and digging into the information, and found some trends.
I was talking with Dory Clark, who's a friend, and she talks a lot about personal branding, and she gave an example once when she was talking about the importance of a personal brand that I think is really relevant here. And she was interviewing Robert Scoble, and kind of internet guru and tech guy, and she was asking him, what happened? How did you get to be such a big deal? And he said, my advice or my mantra has always been to try to be where the wave is going. And she said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, you know, I went to school, I went to college in kind of a tech school at a time when tech was emerging, and so I started writing about tech for the school newspaper. And then when I left and I got my first job, you know, I kept writing, and I started writing for tech publications. And then, you know, I wrote a lot about one thing, and then I started writing a lot about another thing. And so for me, the path to my success, says Robert Scoble, is to try to be where the wave is going. And that's exactly what we're talking about, and that's what, you know, great things rarely happen by accident. It's about being smart enough to listen to that collective consciousness and to use what it is you're hearing, those insights, and develop things that people want. I think that's really cool.
Awesome. Yeah,
really
I do too.
All right. Well, Wendy, you are awesome. How is it that people are going to find you at thesocialstudiesgroup.com? And no, wait, it's not the social studies, it's socialstudiesgroup.com, right?
It's either one. I actually own them both.
Okay. And they're going to find you online at Wendy Scherer. And if you blogged more, which I know that I will probably shame you and make you blog more, they'd find your blog. But anyway, seriously, I'm so thrilled to have you here today. I so appreciate your time and the insights that you've shared. And for everybody listening today, know that you need to stalk her, you need to communicate with her, you need to hire her when you can, and it's just been so great to have you. Thanks so much, Wendy.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.